The 8 biggest Luke Skywalker sequel trilogy complaints. Which ones are right, and do they all even make sense? Luke Skywalker's sequel trilogy arc has become one of the biggest complaints in the Star Wars franchise. But was his story really all that bad? There were admittedly problems with the sequels, which was often a consequence of the movies treating hands repeatedly. This was especially true with Star Wars, The Last Jedi, and Star Wars. The Rise of Skywalker, as The Rise of Skywalker in particular, seemed to willfully ignore or undercut all that was done in The Last Jedi. But there were aspects of The Last Jedi that also overwrote some of Star Wars, The Force Awakens. For the most part, though, audiences were not pleased with any of the plotlines for Luke, no matter which movie in the sequel trilogy it was. Even Mark Hamill has voiced complaints about the handling of Luke's story in the sequel trilogy, making jokes about how he knew all his lines in The Force Awakens before the first read-through. Star Wars projects like Lego Star Wars, Rebuild the Galaxy have also poked fun at Luke's sequel trilogy story. Of the complaints that have been raised, though, which are valid, and which miss the mark, should Luke Skywalker have thrown away the lightsaber? Audiences were already incredibly dissatisfied with Luke's absence throughout The Force Awakens, and the explanation that he had effectively given up hope and gone into hiding somewhere in the galaxy. But this disappointment became so much worse when Luke tossed his Anakin's lightsaber in The Last Jedi. The Force Awakens ended with Rey finding Luke on Ahch-To and holding out Luke's former lightsaber as an offering. The Last Jedi revealed that Luke's shocking response was to chuck the weapon behind him. Luke was wrong to completely lose faith in the Jedi and the galaxy, but he had grown to be critical of the Jedi in a way that had some validity. Outrage about this made sense on the surface. It seemed like a major disrespect to all that had come before, and it felt out of character for Luke. With some distance, though, this moment seems to have a very different message. Luke was wrong to completely lose faith in the Jedi and the galaxy, but he had grown to be critical of the Jedi in a way that had some validity. Luke wasn't wrong that the Jedi way should have been less about weapons and fighting and more about peace, something he'd already shown in Return of the Jedi. Does it matter that Luke said laser sword? Luke's use of laser sword in The Last Jedi proved to be an extremely controversial moment. When Rey said the galaxy needed Luke's help, he sarcastically asked her if she really expected him to go face down the First Order alone with just a laser sword. Notably, laser sword was George Lucas' original name for a lightsaber, and it wasn't even Lucas who ultimately decided on lightsaber instead. This history didn't prevent backlash about this moment, though. Many took issue with Luke's use of this term, arguing that Luke would never have referred to a lightsaber in this way. However, this argument misses the point. Luke's response to Rey was clearly said sarcastically, essentially mocking her, and by extension, the galaxy's perception of the Jedi and what he was capable of. While Luke's negativity may be a legitimate disappointment in the sequel trilogy, The Last Jedi in particular, there wasn't anything about his use of this term that undercut his character. Does Luke's losing hope nullify his original trilogy arc? One of the biggest grievances viewers had about Luke's characterization in the sequel trilogy was his complete loss of faith in the galaxy and the Jedi, which seemed entirely contrary to the Luke last seen in Return of the Jedi. In fact, many felt like this was a betrayal of his legacy, given he had in a sense been the titular Hope in A New Hope. The sequels attempted to explain this with Ben Solo's fall to the dark side and the destruction of Luke's Jedi temple, but even that was a hard sell. Many felt like this was a betrayal of his legacy, given he had in a sense been the titular Hope in A New Hope. Truthfully, this was one of the bigger missteps in the sequel trilogy. While complicating Luke's character could have worked, it just wasn't believable that Luke Skywalker, the Jedi who redeemed the soul of Darth Vader himself, would so easily give up on everyone, no matter what tragedies came along in the 30 years since. It didn't help the sequel's case that this also meant Luke being sidelined for all of The Force Awakens when he is easily one of Star Wars' best characters. It felt like a wasted opportunity. Does it matter that Luke never reunited with both Han and Leia? In terms of wasted opportunities, it was perhaps even more detrimental that the sequels passed on the opportunity to bring the original heroes back together one final time on screen. Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, and Mark Hamill all returned to Star Wars for the sequels, which very easily could have meant a moment in which Leia, Luke, and Han came together again, even if it was just one last time. Bewilderingly, the sequels opted not to reunite the trio.